welcome after lunch. I know the worst thing to do is to be the session right before lunch. So at least we're the one right after lunch, so that's positive. Also, I'm going to walk around a little bit. We want this to be very interactive, and we want comments from you guys. If you've played with any of these models or done anything within your own job, please introduce that to us as well. So with that, I will say I'm very honored and privileged to sit on this panel with these guys. We have Ryan Bucsi from OMIC, Head of Claims. Frank Giaoui, I get it close? Frank's written over 28 articles on AI and insurance. So I read that the other day, Frank, so it's very impressive. Dr. Rosenfeld sitting next to me, risk management, patient safety. So we're going to kind of touch all of that. We've got claims, we've got a tech guy. I'm an underwriter guy, so I'm with Point Bridge, which is a division of Now, and so we're kind of an MGA, MGU, focused really on just data analytics and how to apply it to underwriting. So with that, we'll get started, and I'll ask Ryan to kind of kick us off with an overview of how they're using AI in claims. And I think that's good. You guys are using Frank, right? And so Frank, Optimalex, right? Yes? So
right.
I'd like you to fill us in a little bit on that.
I would consider changing my last name, Giaoui, and maybe the last name of the company, Optimalex. Now, I wanted first to start by saying how lucky we are to be in a panel where the answer to the question is from the beginning. And when we read about the subject, it was data analytics and predictive modeling. Does it help? But you see that we have already answered that it actually helps. Now the question is, how does it help? It's not really a joke, because you are all convinced that yes, it helps. The question is how, in which use cases, and under which condition. So I don't want to be too technical, but there is a need to lay out some common ground for definitions. We are not all into AI and predictive modeling 100% of our time, so let's do some base ground. First and foremost, those techniques, whatever they are here to support some business objectives. As Ryan said, his objective primarily was to reduce the time, reduce the cycle time. You may have different objectives. Assess the risk, reducing the cost, and eventually you may have a combination of all the above. Depending on what is your primary objective, you may not use the same technology, you may not use the same provider, you may not use the same method. Now, in terms of the technologies, some other panels mention AI. We are talking about predictive modeling. How does that fit together? So, more recently, over the last 2 years, AI has been the buzzword for actually generative AI or large language modeling. We'll come back to that in a minute. That is the latest evolution of prior technologies, which were natural language processing. And this is again part of a larger concept of machine learning. So what is the difference between all those technologies? Let's start with machine learning. Machine learning, to make it simple, is identifying patterns in the past that can help you predict the future. It's not deterministic, it's only probabilistic, right? We are not replacing the human expertise, the human decision, but we are helping reducing the uncertainty for the future. That's machine learning. Then you have natural language processing, and these are focused in some areas of expertise. Let's say you are a lawyer or you are in claim, and you want to structure the data from a large corpus of documentation. You have hundreds, maybe thousands of pages. What are the keywords that may trigger liability? So you say maybe duty of care would be a good keyword to identify. Natural language processing would be the technology that helps you identify duty of care or similar wording into a large corpus. And now, generative AI is essentially a way to make a conversation with your models. Those large language modeling generate writing, generate speech, sometimes with audio also, in a way that a human would talk to you. And it becomes very close to an assistant, okay? Last concept I want to share with you is when we speak of AI, the only last part that I mentioned, there is not only ChatGPT, right, from OpenAI. You have Gemini from Google. You have Claude from Anthropic. You have Grok from AIX. You have even some other models like DeepSeek, Mistral AI. And one of the key points is there is no reason to trust any single of these models, right? Because another question you may ask is, are those biased? Yes, they are all biased. We are all biased. The only way to reduce bias is to multiply the sources, to multiply the technology, and keep the control on the final, weight of which technology you are using, because eventually, coming back to the beginning, those are here to help you, to support you into your decision, not the other way around.
Yeah, excellent, and thank you for that description. I'm sure people really appreciate learning that. Before we get to Dr. Rosenfeld, I'd like to say, the term that I've heard that most accurately describes what we're really trying to do is a co-pilot. If you look at how the healthcare industry is using AI, it really is, as other people have talked about, you can summarize all the medical literature and have it at your fingertips. It's a huge amount of information, right? And you don't have time necessarily to read through all of that in order to treat your patient in the next 3 minutes, right? And so what these technologies do is they summarize all of that, they bring to your attention those things that it thinks you should know. And so I think it does make everybody better at what they do, regardless of what they're doing in the claims world, in the underwriting room as well. Dr. Rosenfeld, so you guys use this in patient safety and also in claims determination too. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure, thank you. And just to sort of complete my introduction to this group, it's my first time at the Crittenden meeting, is I'm former vice chair of OMIC, the Ophthalmic Mutual Insurance Company, so I had the pleasure of working for 15 years with Ryan Bucsi, and I was also chair of the claims committee. So, and on top of that, I'm a practicing ophthalmologist. I'm the managing partner and president of a 9-person practice up the road in Delray Beach. So I'm still working in the trenches, still dealing with risk management and analytics in a very small way, and yet also doing things with OMIC in a much larger way, a national way. I'd start off by saying that fact-based decision-making is very important. It's something that physicians live by, and we learn throughout our training. We do that when we want to try a new drug, try a new surgical procedure, or a new treatment. And there's every reason we should be using the same fact-based decision-making in medical malpractice arena. And whether that's, and it has many ways that it's manifests itself in my life. On a small level, I have times just dealing with my own partners, trying to make risk management changes within a practice. And being able to look at what the fact-based decision-making, what this, the predictive analytics have brought to our attention. And it's things like, when there are certain types of surgery, are more likely to be sued for if they don't work out. There are certain complications that may have greater implications, greater risk of being sued or losing a case. Even simple things like learning to apologize. When we started training many decades ago, we were told you should never apologize, that if you went to trial that the patient, it would be tantamount to admitting that there was a failure or you did something wrong. And we've since learned through predictive analytics that it actually makes things better. That by apologizing, showing you're human, by apologizing and empathizing with a patient that things didn't go as planned, it actually goes a long way towards soothing things over. And then the same thing goes for just having open communication and being transparent with patients. And these are things that were contrary to what we were taught, contrary to the old clinical dictums, but we learned were really very important when you analyze it scientifically. It may have seemed counterintuitive, but to the contrary. And just a few other little tidbits is that as a chair of the claims committee, there were many times where having access to this data was very important. As Ryan pointed out, we've learned that if you settle a case within the first 9 months, usually you're going to contain your costs, and if the case goes longer than 9 months, there's a much larger incremental change in what your ultimate indemnity payment may be. It helps us in dealing with cases where we think maybe that a case, in deciding whether or not it should or should be defended, having access to the case scoring, as Ryan pointed out, is very helpful. It's helpful as well in OMIC, an insured needs to give their permission to settle a case. Sometimes we look at the case and we say, boy, this case is hard to defend. We have our risk management consultants who tell us that things are hard to defend. We're told that sometimes even the insured is not a very good witness on the stand. But getting all this data, having all this data put together and analyzed, then we can approach the insured and tell them that they probably ought to consider settling the case, and for all these different reasons, as well as their overall case scoring, they're putting themselves and the company at greater risk. So we use it a lot every day in the practice, as well as on the board at OMIC.
Awesome. So question for you guys before we jump into underwriting. Have you guys ever run an AI-driven, predictive modeling-driven mock trial? Is that technology out there yet? Have we gone that far?
So yeah, predictive modeling are used for mock trials and sometimes to replace mock trials. One of the first use cases we had was actually to complement mock trials. An average cost for a mock trial is $100,000. So if you subscribe to a technology which does that and something else, it's very well return on the investment.
Very good. So since it's after lunch, let's have a kind of figure out who's in the audience, right? So if you were a defense attorney or a claims person, let's see a hand. Okay. Underwriters? Okay. Brokers? Okay. Doctors? There you go. Awesome. So from an underwriting perspective, I've been doing this a long time, and we started with applications, right? And we used to get applications. And the doctors actually used to complete those applications in the old days. And then the office managers started doing the applications, and the brokers started doing the applications. And then as underwriters, we said, well, we don't need a 26-page application. We'll go down in a large group to a one-page app, and we'll ask these key questions, but we lose what you're doing. And even in the best application, you probably have 100 procedures on a page, if you even have that. So we don't really know what our clients are doing. And we have ISO codes, and we have class plans, and all of that stuff, and we basically take what they say they are, and we squeeze them into that box. So now, you have the possibility of seeing all of the data, all their billing data from CMS and from private pay, back to about 2014. So you can better classify the exposure. So if you think you're a large hospital institution and you're a self-insured trust, you feed off information to your actuaries, you have exposures, class 1 equivalents, if anyone remembers that term, right? So we all condense things down into something. But we're starting with a very flawed system to begin with, and there's no validity to how we've classified people, really, because we haven't used any real data to do that. So I think that's the huge advantage that I see as an underwriter. Now I can look at a 1,000-man group, and I can basically have the AI run on it, tell me all the providers that are practicing outside of their specialty, so then I can class them properly. But also, who are the outliers, and who are the outliers within their specialty? And so we use the term clustering. So if you look at the ISO codes, there's about 100 ISO codes. If you look at what are called NUCC codes, there's about 200 of those. So they're more sensitive than the ISO code is. But if you look at kind of what a model will cluster physicians into, you're looking at 200 to 300 clusters. So that tells us that we're not really getting that right when we look at exposures. So I think that's the real value that it brings to underwriting, and it brings it really fast. And so now I can make these decisions in minutes that would have taken me weeks before. And I'm making a much more informed decision. So with that in mind, Ryan, we'll come back to you. So how has it really helped you on a day-to-day in claims? Yeah, and we talked about interdepartmental communications in this line too. They're claims guys and they got their claims system. I'm an underwriting guy, I got my underwriting stuff. Would we ever talk together, right? I mean, that's unusual. But I think one of the things that I see our underwriting technology helping Ryan with is now he's going to know, okay, let's say we have a lap chole MIC, right? So now we know exactly how many lap choles the guy's done. We also know how many lap choles the expert's done. And so that all becomes part of his case analysis, and he can just go right into a system and see that information at his fingertips too, without having to ask anybody even the question. You know, there was a meeting a long time ago, Ryan, where an OMIC representative said that they cover the eye and anything the eye can behold. So, Frank, you want to add anything into this? Because I know you work with a lot of different carriers, right?
Yes, so instead of taking only one example, I would like to take a couple and list them. So first and foremost, it's initially a productivity tool. We call that workflow assistance or workflow automation. You have all noticed, be it in underwriting, claims, patient safety, risk management, you are overwhelmed by more and more information, more and more documentation, data that you have to read, you have to summarize, sometimes you have to structure, and this is only the start, right? With the addition of new technologies like electronic medical record or other legal technologies, be it whichever side you are, you will have more and more documents to manage. And so AI can be used to efficiently summarize or efficiently structure and reduce the time you are spending on mundane manual tasks. Reduce this time that up, in our experience for our clients, this is up to 65% of your time. And whatever is saved there is not really for reducing the staff, as Ryan said, but you can reinvest this saved time into, for instance, resolution of a claim, into underwriting the right policy. And now you are immediately efficient, immediately creative of value. That is a clear use case. Another use case is on the actionable insight. So let's take again the example of claims. Depending on the policy of your company, you may have reserving after, let's say, at FNOL, I think it's the case with Ryan's team. Some other companies prefer reserving after 30 days or maybe 90 days. This can be automated to assist the decision. Highlight, today you have this and that claim on which you need to reserve because the 30 days limit is tomorrow. Or what about statute of limitation? This has only 2 or 3 months before the statute of limitation in this jurisdiction. Highlight, actionable insight. This kind of thing reduces guidelines and timelines, reduces anything that can fall into the cracks. I want to give another example of a client a couple of years ago, and this illustrates the personal bias. Again, another client in claims who unfortunately was hit by a bad verdict. And so the CEO and even the board were completely paranoid for any new such verdict in the future. And when the next serious claim happened, you know, no wonder the chief claim officer had the CEO calling them and say, well, of course, as a chief claim officer, you are the one ultimately deciding what to do, but let me give you a suggestion. If you have to settle at policy limit, do it right away. I'm fine with that. They wanted just to avoid another nuclear outcome on jury trial. Well, our client, chief claim officer, used the product and essentially proved that this next claim was not so serious, was not so meritorious on the liability side, and could counterbalance the recent bias. Essentially, we are all into a mix of emotion and rationalization. These kind of tools can help you have all the similar claims. Of course, we have to compare apple with apple. All the similar risk, if you are talking of underwriting, for similar specialty, similar location, similar board certification, and now you have an objective value that you can decide upon, not necessarily your last recent experience.
Very good. Stephen, So as you mine through the claims data, right, and you're in a very tech-specific specialty in ophthalmology, right? So what have you learned from that you didn't really know until you started doing this that you can then turn into patient safety and risk management?
Well, we're learning really every day. Some things I alluded to before, and that is, for example, apologizing to patients when you have a mal-occurrence. Doesn't mean it's malpractice. Open communications with patients has been helpful. It's helped us even on the board of OMIC with when you have someone who has been sued, one of our insured, do you renew that person again the following year? Do you renew them but raise their premiums? Or are these people that need maybe some remedial continuing education? Or are these people who are such a high risk they shouldn't be renewed? And the more data you can analyze, the more different metrics you can look at in a given insured, I think it helps make a more informed decision, which is better for that physician, but better for the company as well. You know, we all like to avoid nuclear verdicts. I think it'll be very nice having, with what Optimalex is working on now, to have some more software to look at that. Although in ophthalmology we tend not to have the same numbers and the same intensity of nuclear verdicts that you see in other fields of medicine. But relatively speaking for us, certainly the severity is increasing, and the social inflation is very much evident in ophthalmology as it is in every other field.
Yeah, that's a great point. So let me add in there, other than nuclear verdicts, mass tort. And so I know from an underwriting perspective, what it allows us to do is, you know, often in mass torts, it's the same procedure being done over and over on patients that really didn't need it. And so you can identify that through the billing data. So I think that will help in the underwriting side of eliminating or reducing at least the exposure to mass torts as well. So I will throw in one thing that I've learned that was really fascinating was it's a great educational tool for young underwriters. So now I can take somebody that's never underwritten before and they start to read what the AI is saying about the risk. This guy's a dermatologist, he's doing these procedures, these are unusual for dermatology, and these are high-risk procedures. So that's actually summarized right there for the young underwriter. So I've actually learned through it, and it's interesting, you know, we talk about black box and being able to justify this, but the way that our models are set up, they actually will tell me why it's scored the way it's scored. And so we're learning things from that on a daily basis, and I think that just accelerates too.
There was one other point brought up earlier this morning on the other AI conference or lecture, and that is the ability to share this information, that it should be shared not just within the malpractice insurance company or with the given insured, but shared with the risk managers, shared with your legal team, and it'll only make for a more meaningful decision in the long run. And then ultimately even you have the capacity then to share within the whole MPL industry, and I think that would be very powerful.
Yeah, and I think, you know, as underwriters, we don't do a lot of that either, and that's one of the things we're pushing too, is let's have a dashboard that shows the physician exactly why the risk score is the way the risk score is, and suggest risk management and interventions, or at least techniques that may reduce that liability.
Yeah, we can give examples of use cases we did not consider, and that happens with any of the prospects and clients. So I'm sure it will be the same with you guys. When we started with Ryan and his team at OMIC, we were not aware that this could be used for reinsurance. And you had the experience that, of course, reinsurers are super interested into consistency of your reserving, for instance, right? How can we evaluate the quality of your reserving? If you can demonstrate that you are consistently, even if you are under reserving, let's say 20%, that's fine, but it's consistently 20% below, and then they can appreciate the risk with much more certainty. Another example was onboarding the lawyers, and so it's very interesting. How many lawyers did we have in the room? Attorneys, defense counsels? Okay. So defense counsels happen to be paid by the time, right? And I was very naive when we started on the market to approach defense counsels on the side directly, where we sell efficiency, we sell productivity, not time. So there was some kind of conflict. But now that we work with medical professional liability insurance carriers, of course the defense counsels have a common interest because they can work on the same platform, and instead of doing manual copy-paste, typically between a claims rep and their lawyers, they send emails, they send defense counsel evaluation report, they copy-paste, all that manual task can be simplified. So now there is a common interest with the defense counsels. Eventually, you may find a common interest with your insured, maybe for the settlement consent or any kind of exchange. Why not sharing? You are working with scientists, physicians, they love data, they love sciences and proof. So why not sharing some of that, of course on a relevant basis, so that it is more collaborative. And as Stephen said, it is really a shared fact-based decision-making process, not just isolated. I think Patrick mentioned about the underwriting. Underwriting can also use claims data to assess the risk for renewal, for instance.
Yeah, actually, quick story, had lunch with a defense attorney, very seasoned guy, one of the probably top med-mal attorneys in the country, just got his butt absolutely handed to him in court by a young plaintiff attorney who every time that they presented anything, they were going through AI and they had rebuttals to everything. And he's just, insurance companies are very slow to adapt things. But I think the defense bar is as well, because they're very good at what they do, they've been successful, they know this works, and then you run into that, and it's like, oh my God, now what do I do? So I think it's gonna be forced into the defense bar pretty soon, because you're gonna see it sitting across the table from you really soon too, if you haven't already. So you're shaking your head. You want to give us a story? Do you have any real life examples?
Well, actually, it's very funny. My son, recently I was on trial recently, and my son, who's a senior in high school, always asks me about my cases and what they're about. So I was talking to him, and I had just finished writing out my opening, and I was tweaking it. So he plugged it into ChatGPT and came up with a little bit of a better opening than mine. And I was like, talk about AI. So there, and a lot of it was similar because I was giving him buzzwords. And so I adopted some of the ChatGPT into my opening, because I think it has to be personalized, obviously. It doesn't know everything about the case, all the nuances, but it's funny how close. So AI is, it's there, it's real, and we should embrace it. Yeah.
And I would say too that it's a co-pilot, right? It's not taking our jobs. It's making us much better at what we do, and you still have to be there, right? Because it's, as we pointed out, it's not necessarily right?
It's actually interesting. So when you compare the performance of different tools, and again, I strongly suggest that you don't choose one single tool for all the use cases, but let's mention the LLM, the large language modeling. You can very easily spot out hallucination. Everybody has made the experience of some references, some legal references, which seem very accurate, very plausible, but when you check on what is the source, there is not such reference. It's just a likelihood. It's a likely reference, but it did not exist. No authority was decided on that. So this is hallucination when essentially there is not enough data point to train the model, and they invent a data point. But you can have even worse than that. You can have intoxication. So let's say you are on a very remote, and I don't want to mention what is remote, a remote jurisdiction, where there is no such a case happen. It's very easy to intoxicate the model saying, well, I had this case happening. You lie, essentially. And the next day, the model will give you this as a next reference. You can make the experience tomorrow. Again, I don't want to mention Alaska or Puerto Rico, for instance, but I mentioned them. And look what happened. You will see it's very, very interesting. So whenever you compare the performance of those models, you compare accuracy. I gave the example. I think more important than accuracy is timeliness and consistency. Essentially, you want to save time and you want to have no surprise or reduce the surprise. accuracy can always be improved over time. And this is another example I want to give. There is no reason you would like to share your data to those models without precaution. In some cases, you may want to share your data to increase your knowledge of the market. Let's say you want to enter into a new market that you don't really know well. You don't own a lot of data on this market, so it's fine for you to share data and gain more, by definition. But maybe you are the leader in another market. And so in this market, you don't want necessarily to share the data. You want to have an exclusive model for yourself and develop the training with your own corpus of data. That's a different use case, right? And why not mixing both, depending on which jurisdiction, which state, which specialty, if you are multi lines of specialty.
So I had read an article the other day that these are large language models. They don't do math, but they will do math. So somebody did an analysis of, well, how's it doing math? And so they realized that it calculates the last digit. And then it starts to say, well, if you take 90 times 37, right? Well, 90 is like 100, so I'll use 100, and 37 is like 30. And so it does that. And then it kind of summarizes that all up, and then it gives you an answer. Well, if you ask it then, how did it do the math? It will generate a textbook calculation that it did not do. And so there we get into, you know, the potential for intoxication and hallucination, right? Stephen, you want to give us any patient safety stuff that we haven't touched on yet?
Well, I don't have, offhand, not a whole lot more to add, although I will say that I've had, just to reiterate and echo what Ryan and Frank have said, that I was on the reinsurance committee as well, so I've had the pleasure of going to London a few times in the past several years and meeting with our reinsurers at Lloyd's of London. And as recently as this October, when Ryan and I were there, there is a very small percentage of American MPL companies are using AI. They were very impressed, all of our reinsurers to a one, that we were using AI. And as they said, the ability to reserve the proper claims, in our case, claims that we think might have settlements or indemnity payments of $500,000 or more, making sure that you're reserving in a timely fashion and an accurate, consistent fashion. All those things, as Frank pointed out, were very impressive to them and gave them a much greater comfort level that we were using AI and using something more objective to keep on top of things. And in the long run, this certainly helps that health and the well-being of our company.
Yeah, and we'll throw another doom and gloom thing at the industry, right? You know, so underwriters in the MPL line right now, from what I understand, is we're looking at about a 1% unemployment rate. So if you're trying to fill jobs and you haven't been able to fill those jobs yet, now you understand why, right? So while this doesn't replace us, again, this technology is exactly what we need right now, especially in training the young underwriters and being able to manage the books of business with less people too. So that's my 2 cents for the underwriting side.
And one other tidbit, which I think have been alluded to, and you may have read in the press as well, but I'm also a consultant for an electronic medical records company. And they're now using this electronic scribe where it listens to the physician as he walks in the room, has his initial encounter with the patient, will distill down their chief complaint and the other pertinent data that you may have elicited from the patient. And again, it needs to be watched because it doesn't always come out perfectly. But the next step that the company's working on now is taking that data and will tell you what we call the differential diagnosis, the list of diseases, possible diseases causing the problem. It will give you the most likely diagnosis, and then the next step would then tell you what should be the suggested workup to confirm the diagnosis. So it's something that will make for hopefully better outcomes, better practice by the physicians, and hopefully reduce the liability risk. Although, as we all know, if it's garbage in and garbage out, or if it's giving you something that's inaccurate, then unfortunately, if you place too much confidence in that, it may come back to bite you, but in the long run, it may actually help the quality of care.
Frank, go ahead.
I want to pick up on Stephen's point about accuracy. What does that mean, accuracy, right? 85%, 98%, maybe you have heard those percentages. It doesn't mean much without an objective again. For instance, accuracy on liability has the same value on, for instance, the accuracy for the amount. If you are having an accurate answer between 49% and 51% liability, that's a major impact on your results. But if you have $49 instead of $51 in the outcome of a claim, that's not a major result. So accuracy has to be evaluated within the objective.
Yeah, I want to go back to a little bit about EHRs. You know, I know there are hospital systems now that are employing their AI so that not only would they be able to say, okay, this patient responded to these drugs positively, to these drugs negatively. We treated 18 other people in the last 2 years with this same complaint. 6 of them did really well, and so all of that again is being delivered to the physician to make better decisions, right? We talk about burnout and we talk about how much time you have in a patient interaction. You know, at what point does it just become information overload?
There is a fine line, although that's data as a practicing physician you'd love to have.
Yeah.
And in fact, the company I consult for will not only, you can go back and look at how you treated all your cases of herpes infections of the eye over the past few years, but it'll then compare you to your partners in your practice, what treatment regimen they used, what success rate they had, and then ultimately you can also then get all the users of that particular EHR nationally. And this company from the beginning had de-identified or scrubbed data so that there was no identifying characteristics, and they've been able to even sell some of it to drug companies who wanted access to the data as well. So there's some additional benefits of having that data.
Yeah, and let me just jump in and pick on some of the data itself. So if you, and I know we got claims people in this room, right? What's a failure to diagnose? So if I do a lap chole and I nick the common bile duct and I don't figure that out for 2 days, there are a lot of claims people that are going to code that as a failure to diagnose instead of a surgical mishap. So when you look at all of the data that's presented through Candelo and others, you got to understand there's that bias in the data, right? And they are focused very much on failure to diagnose. And so that runs about 40% of claims dollars. So what's the other 50 to 60% of claims dollars? That's where we got the diagnosis right, but we didn't get the treatment right. This is going to find more diagnostic things earlier. And so it's going to send more people into the system. But it's not like there's a lot of people focused on fixing the part of the system that we got the diagnosis right, but there's still injuries within the system. And if you look at fetal heart monitor tracing analysis, we know we have a C-section rate that's too high in this country already. So what do you do with this information? You know, I know you guys don't have to worry about this, but I think really, you know, the OB exposure itself, when you have all this technology that says, you need to take this baby now, and you've got 30 minutes as standard of care to do that, but you don't know that the AI is right. Once that clock starts ticking. There's silence, right? Frank, what do you see for the future for us all?
Yeah, different trends that I see. Number one is what you said, Patrick, is probably the trend would be towards more bridging between silos. Very traditionally, insurance carriers have been working, you know, claims, underwriting, patient safety, mostly isolated, actuaries even more. So those technologies could be used as a common platform or common language for all the departments. That's one big trend we are observing. Another trend, as I said, was the development of predictive models which are dedicated to your market, dedicated to your use cases. And more generally speaking, I would say change management. So when you start adopting those technologies, those predictive modeling, you want to start with easy, low-hanging fruits. Don't start too big, start modestly and then ramp up. That's always a good lesson. And I want to give you an example of change management. We mentioned using the past track record to predict the future. This is maybe a start, but it's certainly not the end game, right? Because the past not only may be not predictive enough of the future, but maybe actually not enough to avoid those extreme claims. What if, when we were in the past, we were doing something wrong that we don't want to replicate? So again, going back to the accuracy, now the accurate model is not the one which will replicate the past, but which may avoid some extreme situation in the future. And this is what I call low-risk change management. My final point is, this is about leadership, right? You are the leaders, you are the decision makers, not the tool. Technology is here to support your decisions, not the other way around.
Very good, Stephen. I know we've probably sucked all of their patient safety stuff out already, but let's go ahead and see the final.
Just as a parting comment, parting words, I would say that AI, it's not a threat, that it's really a valuable assistant to what we do in medicine and in the MPL arena, and that fact-based decision-making is really critical to our success in medical malpractice and all our analysis. And finally, that AI is really adding science to the art of claims analysis. And it's meant to be used, reviewed, not necessarily be the holy gospel, but that it really, I think, is going to become a more important tool as we go forward.
Yeah, and I would echo that on the underwriting side. I think it's going to become almost necessary. You know, we use the term adverse selection, but I mean, if you're not using this technology, you are in adverse selection, because you can't possibly know what I know when I look at an account. And so if I'm higher than you, that's a problem. And when I'm lower than you, that's because I know something you don't know. And so I think that's what you guys are going to see on the underwriting side and the carrier side. And I'd also say too that the carriers themselves, like I said, very slow to adopt technology, and usually are still working on mainframe systems. So it's very hard for them to adapt this into the current systems. And so they're going to be really slow at this. So I think the claims people, the attorneys, you know, and even the brokers need to start pushing for this, because the carriers are going to react pretty slow to this. With that, we have a few more minutes. Let's open up for some questions. Anyone? Starting, she was up first, so I'll come back to you, sir.
I just had a question about the predictive modeling and how related actuarial science with it when we're talking about claims portfolios, med mal, loss forecasting, and what our clients have to face when they're thinking about their budgets. We're looking at predictive modeling. Our carriers are always using their actuaries. Is there a play right now with actuarial modeling and predictive modeling for better outcomes in this, considering that all of the loss development was kind of previously tracked by actuaries?
Yeah, I'll start on that one. You know, yes, absolutely, and you guys should be using it, right? And so I think the problem is that the old actuarial world doesn't really exist anymore, because the ISO codes are not necessarily accurate. And I think the new world is going to be that you're going to basically underwrite each individual and almost attach a relativity to each individual. So we need you for that. But you have to walk away from that ISO code model and class plans in order for it to be successful, if that makes sense. Any of you want to comment on that too?
No, maybe the only thing I would add is when you use experience and exposure in your actuary sciences, in both sides, predictive modeling can be useful. Of course, with the experience, just the actual loss history, but with the exposure, we use also those data to isolate the risk and, you know, build buckets. Not necessarily to give a premium, but to give a discount or variation, a differentiation towards the premium that you are implementing. So yes, I would completely support what you just said, Patrick.
I had a question on the claim side. Like, you know, I understand the historical data going into the analysis, but in terms of the individual claims, what is the specific type of data that your staff are entering in order to get, you know, the results?
Yeah, so our database today covers about 2 million incidents and claims. By the way, it's not only claims, we want also to have an influence on frequency. And this is, I believe, about 2/3 of the medical professional liability market in the US over the last 20 years. as you can imagine, the last 5 years are much more important in our prediction compared to the previous 15.
Yeah, and I'll throw on that too. But one of the things that it benefits us in underwriting too is I'm ingesting everybody's loss information, and I'm getting that every year. And so now my system can tell me what MedPro's development factors are, what their trend factors are. And so I get that level of analysis too. So if you look at kind of entry into a marketplace, right? You know, the regional PIAA companies of the old world, they had their expertise because they knew the judges, they knew the trial attorneys, they knew everybody in that area. And so it was very difficult for another carrier to come in and be profitable taking business from them. But now this almost creates an equilibrium that even if I've not been in that state before, I may very well know as much as your claims people know the day that I show up too. So Michelle, come over.
I can be loud.
Yell out.
What kind of permissions are required for you to share your policyholders' losses, opinions about their cases, and things with a national database? Do you have permissions from the policyholders to go into this national database that's privatized?
Are you referring to the NPDB? What national database are you referring
Well,
to?
you said you had 3/4 or 2/3 of the med-mal claims.
Yeah.
And then you have the majority of the ophthalmology claims. So you're feeding your ophthalmology claims, including the claimant, the defendant, your opinions and everything into your system, which has 2/3 of the med-mal claims. And I just wonder if the policyholders, the ophthalmologists,
It's not named.
if there's a requirement for them to sign, or how do you?
These data are completely anonymous, so maybe we should have started with that. We are lawyers trained in insurance and data science, and so we are super paranoid about privacy. We are HIPAA compliant. We are SOC 2 compliant. So any data that is given by our client is anonymized before being ingested in any manner. So it is individual, but any birth date, any address, any of course phone number, email address is not stored in any manner.
Yeah, and I'd also say if you look at loss runs, right, and these are all part of the application process. And so there's always been sharing of that information within a carrier, within departments, within the reinsurance world. And so there's really, I don't think, an expectation necessarily to privacy when it comes to that.
Yeah, so and another point is predictive modeling does not need individual identification, right? We need, of course, certain criteria that Ryan mentioned, but the PHI are absolutely not needed.
You mentioned about an abrasiveness score. How are y'all determining abrasiveness score? Is that the claim rep and the attorney just picking on a continuum, a number y'all score assigned to?
For the brokers in the room who may have young producers that need to grow a book of business, could this platform be used for prospecting?
Yes, thank you for this question. Actually, several of our partners use it for prospecting, entering new markets. They want to reduce the risk essentially whenever they don't really own the market. And sometimes they are regional, 1 to a couple of states, but they want to enter some other states. And this is a good tool, not to take the final decision, but to reduce the risk when you have taken the decision.
Yeah, and I'll also add to the earlier comment about abrasiveness, right? And so a lot of the patient interactions now are being recorded, and AI is doing transcription. So there are already AI systems that are starting to analyze stress in voice and all of that. So that's coming very soon.
But again, that's just one metric out of a dozen or 15 that we're looking at. So that isn't going to move the needle alone or clinch the decision to defend the case or not. But it certainly, you can imagine their likability by a jury is very important, as subjective as that may be.
And from an underwriter's perspective, back to the prospecting question, Yes, absolutely. Now you can go through your underwriting system and see all the highest risk score doctors, the lowest risk score doctors, and you can go after groups that outperform their peers. And so that is very instrumental, I think.
Yeah, so for doctors, facilities, hospitals, you have combination of risk scores depending on the jurisdiction, depending on the specialty, depending on the board certification, etc. Essentially, it's true that there are many, many variables eventually, but with a half a dozen, you can reduce tremendously the risk.
Okay, with that, I think we're pretty much out of time. We got about a minute, so we'll thank you all for coming. We'll catch you out a little early.